Okay, well, I see some members have joined and we may have a few more trickling in, but I'll go ahead and get started. So this is 10 o'clock. Welcome everyone to our technical advisory group for the Fauntleroy project. My name is Hadley Rodero. I'm the Deputy Director of Planning, Customer and Government Relations at Ferry's, and I'll be moderating our meeting today. Before we start, we may have community members. Doesn't look like we have any right now, but if they do join us, this meeting is open to the public and they'll be in listen only mode and able to submit comments through the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, but they won't be able to chat or turn on their cameras or talk in the meeting. So just be aware of that. I don't see anyone here at the moment. We are recording the meeting and we'll be posting a video of the meeting on the project website as we always do. So that's a good resource if other members of your teams want to view the meeting afterward or you need to refer back to it, that's available. A few reminders for Zoom. Please remain on mute when you're not speaking. It's your choice if you have your camera on or off, whatever you're most comfortable with. And if you want to speak, we'll use the raise the hand feature at the bottom of the screen to kind of conduct our chats and our discussion portions. Today's agenda is pretty straightforward. We're going to spend the bulk of the meeting reviewing the environmental analysis memo that we sent out on Tuesday. That's the discussion of key areas of the environment that will inform our level 3 screening as we wrap up our planning and environmental linkages process. We'll also reserve some time at the end of the meeting to answer questions about the same footprint alternative memo that we sent out on Tuesday. That was in response to a letter from members of the Fauntleroy community who were urging us to include an alternative that kept the footprint of the dock exactly the same as it is today. So that's a response to that and a decision on whether we will include an alternative, same footprint alternative. As a reminder, we're still in the planning and environmental linkages phase of the project, and we'll be completing the level 3 screening later this year. We've wrapped up level 2 screening. We developed and refined a set of 7 alternatives, all of which keep the terminal at the existing location and have different configurations of the dock size and shape of the dock. And we're working through a process to screen and analyze those alternatives. And we've been sharing information on the environment. We'll be sharing information on traffic and other elements before we get to the screening process and select a preferred alternative, which will be the outcome of the PEL process. And then we'll be carrying that single preferred alternative into the NEPA-SEPA environmental review phase. And then from there, designing construction in the 27 to 29 timeframe. So that's sort of an overview of the project and where we're at. A slightly different view of it shows our screening process where we started out with a number of alternatives, including looking at other locations to move the terminal to. During level 2, we focused on the existing location in Fauntleroy. And then now here in level 3, we've refined the alternatives and have different dock sizes and configurations that we're analyzing in this level 3 process before screening them to select a preferred alternative later this year. So that's what this is all working up to. And then just as a kind of roadmap to where we're headed, last meeting, we talked about a concept for the intersection at the exit of the terminal. The meeting before that, we presented those level 3 alternatives and got feedback on those and the screening criteria. So that memo is now final and posted on the project website. And then today, the green box shows we'll be talking about the environmental analysis. And then our next several meetings will cover the topics listed there in the dark green: traffic, good to go, an advanced ticketing study, whether either of those ideas could help improve operational efficiency of the dock, cost, and then construction approach and sequencing. And we'll kind of cover all those topics, get feedback from all our advisory groups on those topics before beginning the screening process and applying the level 3 screening criteria to select a preferred alternative. And then from there, once we have a preferred alternative, and we'll be finalizing the PEL study report and moving into NEPA. So are there any questions before we move on? Any questions on the process and like where we're going and the meeting topics, timeline, anything along those lines? Okay, well, seeing none, I'm going to turn this over to Marcia Tolan, our environmental lead for the project, who will walk through the environmental analysis. All of this is in the environmental memo attachment that we sent on Tuesday afternoon. And she's going to talk sort of in detail about the key findings of that memo.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. So I think that this graphic is very familiar to you, but it's a good graphic to show you about how we're evaluating level 3 and to just orient you again to the key environmental features that are near the terminal and how they're being considered as we evaluate alternatives and then screen them. So the main key features are the intertidal and nearshore habitats, which include eelgrass and macroalgae near the dock. It offers habitat for salmon and other marine wildlife. And in a recent study or survey that we conducted last summer, it confirms that there's no eelgrass in the area around the end of the dock where propeller wash from vessels creates a scour hole. And that scour hole prevents macroalgae growth. Then there's Fauntleroy Creek, which currently flows under Fauntleroy Way southwest, south of the dock, then under the dock to the north, and then into Puget Sound. Fauntleroy Creek provides spawning habitat for salmon and trout. Then there is the aging dock, which is supported by creosote-treated timber piles and contains more than 1,000 tons of creosote-treated material. Creosote, as you know, is a known water pollutant. The dense timber piles change the flow of the creek and cause debris and driftwood to snag and collect under the trestle on the shore. This makes it difficult for fish to pass and to and from Fauntleroy Creek. There's Cove Park, which offers public waterfront access and a narrow sandy beach to the dock. And then to the east, there's Captain's Park, which provides public green space with bench seating across Fauntleroy Way southwest from the terminal entrance. So our analysis is focused on the environmental elements in the level 3 screening criteria that are most crucial to meeting the project's purpose and need. We developed this analysis by reviewing public data, conducting limited field work in the area near the terminal, and then considering input from the communities around and agencies and tribes. So this information is used to apply the screening criteria to the level 3 alternatives and to identify a future preferred alternative. After the level 2 screening, WSF refined level 3 alternatives and reviewed how the alternatives respond to the surrounding environment. Common environmental factors of each alternative include, as you see here, raising the dock higher than the existing dock to meet rising sea levels, to allow more space and daylight under the dock, removing about 430 creosote-treated timber piles and other creosote-treated dock members, using fewer steel piles to support the new dock, providing more space for fish to pass to and from Fauntleroy Creek and the surrounding eelgrass beds, which are important habitat for salmon and other fish. And then finally, increasing the square footage of the structure built over the water. This is, as you know, it's known as overwater structure to align an updated safety and design standards. So today in our meeting, we just want to focus on the environmental screening criteria. The full list of the level 3 screening criteria is in the level 3 alternative summary. And it was sent out to you earlier, but I believe we'll drop a link to it in the chat just in case you want to bring it up for your information.
Marsha, it's not online, so I can't put a link to the chat, but it is an email from Tuesday afternoon. If anyone can't locate it, just send me a chat and I'll forward the email to you. I did
Okay.
put in chat a link to the alternative summary for reference on the different alternatives you're talking about.
Thank you. Yeah. So these environmental criteria are accommodating projected sea level rise, avoiding changes to parks and recreation areas, including nearby Cove Park and Captain's Park, permitting and coordination regarding effects on or opportunities to restore macroalgae and eelgrass habitat, increase in overwater coverage, environmental mitigation costs, cultural resources, and tree fishing rights. So the next slide shows a photo that just helps orient what sea level rise, what we're talking about when we say sea level rise. The top photo shows you the existing conditions of the current dock, and then the rendering below shows a perspective of how the proposed dock is elevated to increase more space for sea level rise. So we know the marine environment surrounding the dock provides valuable eelgrass habitat for forage fish, salmon, and other marine wildlife. When undertaking the environmental analysis, we characterize 3 ecological zones around the dock. So as you see in this graphic, zone 1 is the upper shore zone. This is the area closest to the shore where Fauntleroy Creek flows into Fauntleroy Cove. And then zone 2 is a shallow marine zone. The area around the dock, this is the most ecologically sensitive area where eelgrass and macroalgae grow. And then zone 3 is the deeper marine zone to the west. This is the area west of the dock where deeper water and less sunlight makes it difficult for eelgrass and other marine vegetation to grow. The results of the analysis show that the A alternatives have less overwater coverage, but they keep the scour activity in the ecologically sensitive area at the end of the dock. Alternatives B and alternative B3 have the smallest increase in overwater coverage while moving the scour activity into deeper water, creating an opportunity for restoration of macroalgae and eelgrass. And then alternative C has the most overwater coverage. It also would move the scour activity from the vessel into deeper water. It's a little bit tiny print, but the same table is in the environmental alternatives, the environmental memo that you received. And so you can perhaps look that up if you've got that also open and available to you. But as an overview, to avoid and minimize environmental effects that are caused by the overwater shading, we developed alternatives that taper and lengthen the dock. So the table shows the total amount of overwater coverage, including the existing dock. We reserve some time at the end of our meeting today to talk more about the same footprint alternative memo that we sent out ahead of time, because it's not listed here with the rest of the alternatives. So, as we move with development of the alternatives, we looked at mitigation costs, and will be environmental impacts caused by the project to be compliant with regulatory agencies and tribes. We expect that these factors will influence environmental mitigation costs, and these are total increase in overwater coverage, increase in overwater coverage in ecologically sensitive zone 2, and the opportunity to restore eelgrass and macroalgae within zone 2. So based on these factors, we expect that The alternatives B1, B2, and C will have higher mitigation costs comparatively to the A alternatives, and alternative B and B3 will have lower mitigation costs. It's because they have they have the most overwater coverage, or the least overwater coverage. At this stage, we don't expect differences between alternatives related to cultural resources. Fauntleroy Cove lies within the usual and accustomed treaty fishing area of the Suquamish tribe and the Tulalip tribes of Washington. The project would affect the tribe's ability to exercise their treaty rights. So we will continue consultation with these tribes throughout the life of the project. This consultation will inform our work to screen the alternatives and identify a preferred alternative. All level 3 alternatives evaluate the dock and use fewer piles, which would change the views and experience of users of Cove Park and Captain's Park. As you can see with these two simulations on the screen, alternative B3 has the least effect on Cove Park with no widening to the north. And then alternative B1 has the most effect on Cove Park, widening the dock 22 feet to the north. A summary of these results. It's a lot of information here, but again, and you can refer to the environmental memo later to dig deeper in. But it summarizes the information we'll use to complete its screening of the level 3 alternatives. So while alternatives A, A1, A2, and A3 offer less overwater coverage than the others, they keep scour activity in an ecologically sensitive location. Alternatives B and B3 offer the smallest increase in overwater structure in the most ecologically sensitive area and more opportunity to restore macroalgae and eelgrass growth. The A alternatives, alternative B and B3, likely have lower environmental mitigation costs. Alternative C includes the most overwater coverage. Alternatives B1 and C have higher environmental mitigation costs. Then finally, alternative B3 has the least effect on Cove Park because it does not widen the dock to the north towards the park, and alternative B1 has the most effect on Cove Park because it widens the dock 22 feet to the north. Because we're in a planning phase for the project, we don't have enough design detail to effectively differentiate between alternatives. In other words, the environmental effects that are shown here in these categories are really similar across the level 3 alternatives at this level of planning. So once we select a preferred alternative and evaluation of the following factors then can ensue during the environmental review process. These are noise, air, and visual quality, construction effects, coordination with the National Historic Preservation Act and the Endangered Species Act, land use, and navigable waterways. So at this point, I will hand off to Hadley for any questions that you may have about this material.
Thanks, Marcia. So now we're ready to have discussion and questions, and we can go back to any slides that we need. Haley, it might be nice to just go back to that summary of results slide. I think that's a good one to have on the screen. And Penny, you have a question or comment?
Yes, let me lower the hand here.
Okay.
I can't talk and do that at the same time. So I was actually reading the memo and I did not get through it just because there was a shorter turnaround time this time around. Or maybe this is our normal time and I'm just not tracking, but I got through some of it. And one of the things that I am noticing and struggling with just a little bit is the way the information is being presented. I'm not saying it's being presented wrongly, but I feel like it's really been hard to understand how the less reduced number of piles still results in a table in the environmental analysis that shows almost all of the alternatives still results in a footprint increase for the in-water structure footprint. So I was like, and clearly the removal of creosote is great, but I was wondering if it was, and I got down to page 29 in case you're wondering how far I got. So I can see there's this little discussion that sort of starts to kind of touch on this, but you guys don't really pull this out. And I was wondering if it's because the piles will be maybe fewer in number, but bigger in footprint size than the existing creosote treated piles.
Marcia, can you address that?
Okay, hopefully I got everything that you were trying to convey,
I know,
Penny.
it was,
But no,
it was
it's
a lot.
okay. It's all right. We can parse through it. But yeah, there'll be fewer piles, but they are larger and they're made of concrete. So yes, the benthic footprint would be larger for each pile, but there will be fewer of them. And there's more space between them so that fish can pass more easily and less debris will snag.
Okay, so I just feel like that's not really being pulled out clearly, which is to say, even though you have this bigger footprint, it's from the size of the pile changing. So you're reducing the number of piles, but the materials and the way that it's being done increases the actual footprint of a single pile or column, whatever you want to call it. And so it seems to me that the real benefit then is you guys maybe have some flexibility to look at the configuration and adjust it somewhat to then target, like you said, the flow through, which I can see that that's kind of pulled out in other parts, but I just wanted to say that you wanted some feedback on this analysis. And as you move forward as well, I think that could be spelled out just a little bit more clearly. Like I can see it's there and I had to take some guesses from just being in construction a little bit and knowing that sometimes those piles will change in their footprint size for an individual structure, but it wasn't really clear.
Thank you. That's good feedback.
Great feedback. Anyone else have questions or comments about what Marcia presented or what's in the memo? I know we didn't give you a lot of time to review the memo, which is okay. Rod?
Yeah, I'm Rod Malcolm here. For those who don't know me, I work for the Suquamish tribe. I'm a biologist. And I'm going to be a bit rambling in my comments because I haven't had much time to look at the memo. And what I have is written presentation, not for narrative discussion, which is done differently. First of all, there's a lot of detail in all the documents that the state has provided. That's most welcome. It helps understand the project. And some of the stuff I'm going to say might be a bit premature for the stage that we're in right now, but it's going to be issues that are going to come up as you move forward into the permitting process, and they may influence your design and considerations. So I want to get them out right now. I was wondering, following up the discussion about the number of piles under the trestle, and maybe it's already been considered, but if not, one should look at the size of wood that's currently trapped by the current pilings and consider, will the additional spacing between the new proposed piles actually make any meaningful difference in the amount of wood that's trapped underneath? Because once you got one big piece there, it's going to trap all the smaller pieces. So that's something you may wish to consider. The tribe looks at overwater coverage for environmental issues the same way that most agencies look at, but when it comes to treaty fishing access, the tribe looks at it differently. It's the total footprint or the total area that's outlined by the physical structures. So if you have a dolphin of 100 square feet, that has an overwater coverage of 100 square feet. But if that dolphin in combination with, say, 4 other dolphins encloses an area of, say, 3,000 square feet, that's the area that the tribe will look at for impacts to treaty fishing access. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, the documents I reviewed to date, they talk about increased length of the structure. From the structure's X feet long, now it's going to be Y feet long. That's a slightly different statement than how far the structure is going to be offshore. Because a structure can expand landward, or the angle of the ramp can influence how far structures are offshore. So the tribe would be interested, in addition to the actual physical length of the structure, what's the actual net movement waterward of all the structures?
Thank you, Rod. Those are good comments.
Yeah,
Appreciate them.
That's it for now.
Yeah, and I just want to relay that we can appreciate that you had a short amount of time to review the document. We were working to get it done and in a way that the information was clearly transmitted. So we appreciate that you had a short amount of time to review it, and hope that if there's more questions that you have, that you don't hesitate to contact us about it.
Well, as I said, I found a lot of information in there. It was very nice to see that. And we're just working through the process right now. So it's an iterative document.
So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Rod. Laura, you have questions or comments?
I just mostly a question, although I appreciated what Penny and Rod had to say and agreed with a lot of their questions and concerns as well. But I also wanted to, and I also have not had near enough time to finish this document, but I wanted to ask, I believe I read in the beginning somewhere that there was kelp to the west of the dock, but I don't see it shown in the images, just that there was a sentence of that. And I was wondering if you could be more specific as to where that's relative to the dock.
I'm gonna ask if Sasha Visconti, who's on the phone, has an idea of exactly where that kelp location is.
Oh,
If
Laura.
not,
You got me flat-footed. I'll have to look at the report, but I believe it's not within, if I recall correctly, there weren't any densities of kelp in that it was offshore and of the prism of the docks. I don't recall, I think it was sort of southwest, and I can get you this information, but it wasn't in the sort of fray. You can see where the vessel, the prop activity has limited macroalgae and eelgrass growth here. But we can get those specifics to you.
Like Rod mentioned, it's really helpful to have, more dimensions, better, basically. So not only
Sure.
for extensions and stuff, but we're also going to want to know exactly how close that eelgrass is to the dock at its closest point, how, at different points, since it curves around like it does with a scour hole and everything, oftentimes it's really nice to have that, a line extending to whatever point you've measured to, and the distance that, that is, whether it's 10 feet or 25 feet or 100 feet, as to how close those points are to the dock. And then same thing with the kelp, is just, is it 300 feet? And, it is helpful to have that reference, so it's a visual and everybody knows it's either is a concern or it's not a concern.
Sure, that makes
Thank
sense.
you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Laura.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. And the question about kelp came up from our community advisory group last night as well. So that's a great comment. Any other questions or comments or suggestions for the analysis, Rod?
There were two comments. There was some reference to a potential temporary slip at the site. It'd be interesting to know where that is in its configuration and size it's going to occupy, because that's of a treaty fishing access concern. And it's also some of the wording says the current design does not preclude building the permanent second slip in the future. So more information about that would be helpful, because you don't want to do a design right now that when you come to adding a permanent slip later in the future, the tribe may have concerns about. You want to address that early. And I'm a bit confused about the potential for overhead loading here. Several of the documents talk about overhead loading, but I was under the understanding that the Issaquah class ferries cannot deal with overhead loading.
Dave, do you want to answer that one? Address that one?
Yeah, I'll try to hit on both of those. So in order to build the project, our current thinking is that we would have to have another slip out there so that we could replace, depending on the configuration and the length of the preferred alternative, we would have to have a way to continue to operate while we're replacing that slip, potentially further offshore. So there is talk about a temporary slip. There is no funding for either a second permanent slip, and there's no funding right now for overhead loading. So those are things that certainly could be added on years from now, decades from now, as funding became available. Certainly don't want to design a structure that would preclude the possibility that those could be added, but right now we have second slips at Vashon and we have second slips planned at Southworth, and from an operations standpoint, we do not need a second slip at Fauntleroy. It's just for this temporary condition where we have to construct in parts of the dock will then basically be out of service, and we still need a way to operate. So I hope that answers your question, Ron.
It does, but I just want to emphasize that the temporary slip is a potential impact to treaty fishing access.
Certainly it is. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And Rod, just to clarify, the Issaquah class ferries can use overhead loading. They do it at Coleman Dock and other terminals, even though we don't have it on this route at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
I think you're next, Penny.
Okay. So just a couple things. I'm sure we've touched on this, but just someone please refresh my memory and let me know if it's actually in the environmental analysis that I just haven't gotten to yet. But if things are moved out to deeper water, we have touched on whether or not the scour hole will fill in, and is that covered in the environmental analysis and what the benefits are of having that filled in? It's kind of implied that that scour hole prevents that the existing vegetation in the area from coming in and occupying that space, which sort of implies that if the scour hole wasn't there and it was filled in, that it's at the right spot for the eelgrass or whatever to colonize it. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly.
Penny, yes, you're understanding what we were trying to convey, that
Okay.
if we were moving the place where vessels arrive at the slip further out, that scour hole could fill in and could provide more opportunity for eelgrass and macroalgae habitat.
Okay. And I had a couple more things. One thing that I was wondering is that pictures of the existing dock show like the overwater coverage has a certain amount of shading no matter what. So I assume that even though the dock would be raised in heights, which sometimes on different projects that's been like considered more of a benefit if it's higher and how that can affect the shading. But I assume that with sea level rise, even though the dock goes higher, the level of the sea level rise would kind of cancel out a benefit to increased height. The increased height is really to make sure that the structure is safe. And it says that you allow more space and daylight under the dock, and the pictures show that, but I'm wondering if over time that will be lost.
That's a good, that's good for us to keep in consideration. We've not done that analysis because it's going to be something further on as when we get a preferred footprint, then we can more effectively do that analysis. But we do see that generally overall rising the height does allow for more light, but the metrics you laid out for us are helpful to keep in mind.
Okay, and I would imagine that at first it really will allow more daylight. This isn't going to be this instantaneous thing necessarily, even though construction also is not instantaneous. It's a little faster than the sea level rising.
Yeah.
So just one final point was, as you're looking at mitigation options, a lot of emphasis was put into the environmental analysis of how the Fauntleroy Creek is also habitat and connected to, we all are very familiar with at least a general exposure to life cycles of Andromeda's fish and going up in the creeks and everything. And so I noticed that the riparian habitats and things that really contribute to making those systems more beneficial for aquatic life seems sparse. So just as you're looking at mitigation options and discussing that with the agencies, I was kind of curious about like, hey, as you're trying to move things away and looking at really those zones 1 and 2 seem to be some of the higher bang for the buck for the fish. If there would be options to increase and work with the parks on what could be done to improve some of the habitat, not just in the water, but, you know, and little upland areas that kind of support those aquatic environments. And that's all I had to say.
Thank you. That's good input.
Thanks, Penny. Laura, you're next.
Thanks to Penny for mentioning those. That's a great question about the sea level rise, and I appreciate her comments about Fauntleroy Creek as well, and definitely making improvements there if possible. I also wanted to add that with any consideration of any temporary structure that's over water coverage, there is a potential for that to have to require compensatory mitigation for temporary overwater coverage. So if typically anything that's kind of in place more than 6 months, we start looking at requiring mitigation for that, even for a temporary structure. So just something to keep in mind when you're figuring out impacts and planning and all that.
Thank you.
So the summaries that you showed for environmental mitigation costs of those are just the permanent structures. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
It was a question for Marcia. Marcia,
The information is really just for the permanent structures. It's not showing anything about temporary structures because we don't know. We're not at a point where we can really talk about how a contractor might build this, but we just know that some of the pieces would be temporary structures. And so when we get closer to, you know, when we do have that preferred alternative footprint, we can do more speculation on how someone might build it and know where those temporary structures would be.
Thanks for clarifying that. Penny?
Okay, wait, Where's it? Lower the hand. Okay. I know it's so clear. The brain can only do one thing at a time. So I was just wondering if the analysis really recognizes and just calls out that, you know, the areas that still have yet to be fleshed out, but that Washington State Ferries is really keeping it on their radar, and we'll be discussing what's going to be needed or acknowledging that, you know, this potentially would need mitigation. I just wondered if that was documented. Again, just, you know, you guys did actually a great job. I too really appreciate all the effort that's been put into this analysis to kind of do the comparisons between things, because I know that gets to be a lot, and summarizing it in tables, that was helpful. But I just didn't know if you have also just identified a little more clearly, these are the areas where we know we'll still be in discussion about what would be needed, because these will be temporary impacts driven by design. And, you know, when we have more, I noticed that was also identified in your list of things that will have yet to be dived into, such as construction. So
That's a great comment. We can take that as a addition to this draft memo for the next version.
Yeah, thanks for iterating these aspects for us to continue to look at and keep in mind.
Any additional comments or questions on the environmental analysis? Okay, well, with that, we're going to move on, but feel free. I know we gave you limited time, as Marcia acknowledged, to review it. So if you have further comments or questions or suggestions, just send them our way in the next several days or weeks would be great. As we continue to move iteratively through all these topics, we're not forgetting this part, and we can certainly return to it at a future meeting if we need to. Last night with our community advisory group, we did talk to them extensively about an upcoming round of community engagement. It's been near 3 years since we did open public meetings on this project, and we feel like it's time to kind of go to the broader community beyond our advisory groups that we've been working with quite closely, and some of the key community stakeholder groups. So we'll be holding public meetings in early May and community pop-up events in the Triangle Route communities, and we'll have an online open house and be doing community briefings with different groups in each of the communities. So I just wanted to let you all know that. I know it's kind of less pertinent for this group, but if you have suggestions, or if you hear from constituents or community members that you think would benefit from an update on the project, please let me know. And we'll be doing all that in early May and sharing that information with you. And then one of our future meetings will share what we've heard back with you, just so you can see kind of where the community is. This round of meetings will be more of a project update than asking for input on anything in particular, just sort of preparing the public and the community for when we go out with the results of the screening and identification of a preferred alternative, that then we'll be asking for comments on that. So we felt like it's important to sort of level set with everyone and remind people about the project, since it's been so long, and make sure they're familiar with the process and the timeline and the purpose and need and some of the key issues. So does anyone have any comments on community engagement, thoughts, suggestions, concerns? Okay. So then moving on from that, we wanted to spend a little time discussing the same footprint alternative memo. This resulted from a letter from some of our Fauntleroy community advisory group members. 5 members who live right in the immediate vicinity of the terminal sent us a letter asking why none of the alternatives kept the footprint of the dock exactly the same size. As Marcia showed in that overwater coverage table a few slides ago, the smallest dock alternatives still increase the size of the dock about 30% or more to meet current design standards. So they asked us to consider adding another alternative that would keep the dock size the same size. So Dave's going to kind of talk through our memo responding to that request.
Yeah, and this might get a little bit on one of the earlier questions we fielded today. around this sort of, we kind of loosely have been talking about a same size dock, but what that meant to WSF was a similar size holding capacity. And the question that we got from one of the community advisory groups was just, well, what about a dock that's exactly the same footprint, square footage wise, as what's out there today? And so we'll go to the next slide here. We'll kind of talk through sort of some of those things and why we've eliminated the same size footprint. And really, it doesn't meet our purpose and need for the project. What creating a same size footprint would essentially eliminate holding lanes on the dock, because we have to provide and I'll go through these individually. We have to provide space for sidewalks, bicycles. We have to design the structure to current design standards, and that includes the structure itself as well as the holding lanes. So when you do all of those things, the actual holding capacity on the dock decreases, and so we don't have that same ability to efficiently and safely load and process pedestrians, vehicles, and bicycles. We also don't provide the operational efficiencies that the future dock needs to provide. We have inefficiencies, if you will, at certain periods over the course of the service calendar, and we're trying to, in this project, as part of the purpose and need, is to create efficiencies in how we operate the facility. And the same size docking, eliminating holding lanes and constraining that does not provide those operational efficiencies, and will not meet our service levels that we project on the route through not only 2040 long range plan, but through the design life of this structure. And then finally, the same size footprint does not provide all of the multimodal connectivity, the customer service, and accomplishes that ridership growth. So there's a number of things that we have, and probably admittedly, we haven't done as good a job explaining why the same size footprint doesn't work. But it doesn't meet in essence, it doesn't meet the purpose and need. And so that's why to match the existing in terms of holding capacity of 84 car facility, the dock is widened slightly to accommodate these things that we're required to provide. So I'll pause there. I know this isn't something this group has been probably paying too much attention to, but I did want to give an opportunity to, if you had any questions about the fact that even the existing holding capacity results in a larger dock. Yeah.
Any questions about that? The memo that Dave's referring to, we did send on Tuesday. And I know you might not have had time to read it yet, but it's meant to sort of document this decision for the project record. Any questions or comments on this? Okay, well, and if you do have questions or comments, or when you start digging into it, just let us know. You can always follow up later. I think this will be an issue with the community that continues to come up. It's something that some of the neighbors feel pretty passionately about. So it's something that I think we'll continue to revisit through the rest of the Pell process and the life of the project. Okay, so I think with that, we're nearing the end of what we'd had on the agenda for today. Next steps, as I mentioned, public meetings and a round of community engagement coming in the next couple of months. And then we'll be having more technical advisory group meetings on individual topics. Like today's was on the environmental analysis. We'll have meetings on the traffic modeling and traffic analysis, the study of good to go and advanced ticketing, leading into sort of any ways to improve operational efficiency at the dock and toll collection, the cost and the construction approach and phasing. And then after all of that, and we've gotten feedback on all of those topics, we'll begin working through the screening of the level 3 alternatives. So look for meeting dates for all of these topics, not necessarily in that order. And we may sort of bundle some of those topics into an individual meeting or need a couple meetings to discuss some of those topics, depending on the amount of information and the level of interest. So please communicate with us. We'll do our best to get everything out to you much earlier than we did this time. But let us know if you feel like a topic needs more discussion or if you want more time with it. We can certainly do that. The idea is to everyone sort of feel comfortable with all the material before we begin making decisions and screening out any alternatives. So any final questions or comments before we wrap up and give you back some time in your day? Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. We'll see you
Yeah,
soon.
thanks everyone. Bye.
Thanks, bye. Thanks for all the great comments today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.